Years now, Jonathan and I have been good friends, and we've preached some series together, writing sermons together. And I don't know if there is a harder working preacher in our fellowship of churches. And I tell you this not because we're friends, but I truly believe it, that you are absolutely blessed to have Jonathan and Leslie and their family here. Because one of the things that I just absolutely love about Jonathan, your first service kind of hits at a time. This sermon starts right at a time before our service starts at the Vine and Temple. And so I'm usually in my office wrapping some things up, and I can pull it up online. And every time Jonathan preaches, he says some things as if he just discovered them that week. And I just love that. Like, he walks across the stage and goes, "Did you know? Have you heard?" And that's so incredible because so many preachers, and I'm sure that you are aware of who they are and you've seen them in your life, after you've done it a while, you become so cynical and so jaded. And nothing seems new, and you want to impress everybody with all your erudition and everything that you know. And it's so incredible to see someone who has an active and alive relationship with Jesus Christ and is excited to share that with other people. So when he comes back, he didn't pay me to say this or anything. I just want you to know that he is a blessing to me as a friend, and I hope that he's a blessing for you. Well, we live in Temple, Texas, and I am the lead minister at a church there called The Vine. And every summer during The Vine, because Temple is a place where just about everything in Texas that you'd want to go to is about 3 hours away or less. So Temple is not a place where on the weekend you stay. It's a place you leave. And so in the summer, we have a lot of leaving and coming and going, and we always talk about things that are the kinds of things that you can just kind of hop in and hop out of, and we want to connect them with pop culture. And so this last summer, what we have been talking about is the gospel according to Taylor Swift. Now, I know what you're thinking, that you've heard of the gospel according to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You know all that, but you don't know nothing about the gospel according to Taylor Swift. Well, if you don't, that's just because you're not paying attention. Here's the deal. Taylor Swift, if you don't know who she is arguably the biggest pop star in the world. So two things happened that put Taylor in the news earlier this summer. The first was that Forbes magazine estimated her net worth at just over $250 million. And the second is that she broke up with her boyfriend, Calvin Harris. Now, if you follow Taylor Swift, you know that her breakups are a big deal. So apparently, Calvin Harris broke up with her because, according to him, she wanted babies and stuff. But every time Taylor breaks up with someone, she does what songwriters do, which is to write a song about it. So, I want to tell you about a few of them. When she broke up with Harry Styles from One Direction, she wrote the song, "I Knew You Were Trouble When You Walked In." Which, that's the story for some of you. Now, you've got a past, you've got a history, you've got a person in your life where you were in a relationship with them and you knew from the get-go that was trouble. And later, when she broke up with Jake Gyllenhaal, she wrote the song, "The Last Time." And that's some of your story too. That you've done something and you said, "That's the last time." But you did it again anyway. And then when she broke up with Taylor Lautner, she wrote the song, "Back to December." Now, I don't know all this because I did a whole lot of research. I know this because this is what my children told me happened. And so I just trust them. I'm just going to go with it. And so when Taylor Swift writes a song about a relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship, or when she writes a song about a friendship that's gone south like bad blood, or when she writes a song about growing up and leaving home, people tend to love it. And why do we listen? Because I think we all know that somewhere inside of us, that art, music, poetry, good books, movies, that they're intensely personal experiences, and they give voice to what we actually feel about life. And Taylor Swift right now is arguably the loudest voice
in our world, singing and sharing about our shared experiences. And so you may be here this morning and you really like Taylor Swift. Or you may be here and have never heard of Taylor Swift. You may be here and she's just not your cup of tea. You may like Taylor Swift and just lie about it to your friends. That you think that you're too old or you're too cool. Taylor Swift is just for adolescent girls and that sort of thing. But let me tell you, 34 million albums don't sell themselves. And they're not all bought by teenage girls. And so when we started looking at this, one of the things you need to understand about my church, The Vine, is that between the ages of birth and 18, there are like 2 boys and like 1,000 girls. So we've had people show up and they visit a couple of weeks and they like everything. And they will come to me and we'll talk and say, here's the problem. There are no boys at this church. And they'll just go someplace else. And then we had this experience when we were going through a revisioning of ourselves 4 years ago. When I came there, I sat down with our worship leader and some other people who were pivotal in the system. And I said, I think maybe what we want to target is we want to shoot for a 35-year-old guy who's married and professional. And we had a lot of reasons for thinking through that. So, he was about that age, and I was a little bit older than that at the time. And we said, let's just design something that we would like every Sunday. So we were aiming for 35-year-old guys, and what we got were 50-year-old women. And they just love it. So people come and visit our church, and they make note, like women pray and do other things here in public. And I was like, we have to. That's all we have. Like, it's just estrogen from cradle to the grave here. And so she's an artist that's important to a certain demographic, and so we pay attention. And so when I'm in the car, I drive my girls to school and back every day. And so my oldest daughter gets to play DJ with Apple Music. And so every day when we get in the car and we're driving to school, one of the first 2 songs invariably is Taylor Swift. And I wish I could say that I hated it, but I kind of don't. And I wish I could say I didn't know the lyrics, but I kind of do. And I wouldn't hold Taylor Swift out as a role model for anyone. But she does have her finger on the pulse of what people experience in life. So in 2014, her latest album, 1989, came out, commemorating the year of her birth, if you wanted to feel old for a moment. And the first song was this little song, Shake It Off. And it can be a little jarring when you first hear it, but I want you to listen to just a little piece of it.
I stay out too late, got nothing in my brain. That's what people say. That's what people say. I go on too many dates, but I can't make them stay. At least that's what people say. That's what people say. But I keep cruising, can't stop, won't stop moving. It's like I got this music in my mind saying it's gonna be alright. 'Cause the player's gonna play, 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 and the haters gonna hate, 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 baby. I'm just gonna shake, 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 shake it off, shake it off. Heartbreaker's gonna break, 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 and the faker's gonna fake, 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 baby. I'm just gonna shake, 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 shake it off, shake it off. I never miss a beat. I'm lightning on my feet, and that's what they don't see. That's what they don't see. I'm dancing on my own, dancing on my own. I'll make the moves up as I.
Yeah, we played that at my church, and the singing just kept on going. It was like a worshipful moment. And let me tell you something. They just played that a whole lot louder than they did in first service. I don't know what that means. So when you go deaf, you say, I should have gone to first service. So Taylor Swift, like all people, kind of lives in a world where there are more than enough people in her life, and I would suppose more than enough people in your life who are all too ready with judgment and criticism. So for reasons that I still don't understand, I have a presence on the internet, a blog to be precise, and every time that I write something, it doesn't matter what I say or how I say it, that someone will make a comment, and if it's not just on the blog, it's somewhere else. If someone posted on Facebook or put a link in Twitter or on Instagram or somewhere, and there will always be some comment, and every time, no matter what the comments are, there are going to be people with judgment and criticism. And I've been called everything from mistaken to a false teacher to deluded to stupid, and that's just my friends. There was one guy for a particular post who went on my wall on Facebook and wrote in all caps, which is so sweet. And he said, "Why do you hate the Lord's church?" Which my children and my friends never let me forget. And there was another guy who went around on my blog and everywhere else that someone had linked this particular article, just writing and leaving the same comment, just cutting and pasting the same critical comment everywhere across the internet that he could find. So last fall, I started writing a little bit for foxnews.com. And before the first article went live, the editor called me from New York, and she said, "Sean, I just wanted you to know that your article is about to go live in about 5 minutes, and I'm going to tell you what I tell all of our authors. Don't read the comments." Well, I thought that was pretty good counsel. So I called my parents, I called my mom, called my dad, and I said, well, the article's about to go up, and they wanted me to tell you and anyone else, just, go and read it, and you can see it and be proud or whatever you want to do, but don't read the comments. My mother didn't. My father did. And then he called me to tell me what all the comments were. I bet you've been there. You've been criticized, you've been judged, you've felt attacked. Sometimes it's by someone that you don't even know. Other times it's by a boss or some superior, maybe a student or a client of yours. Maybe you get criticism from people who are close to you, a spouse, a close friend. Maybe it's a parent or a child. No one gets through life without bearing their share of criticism. When I was in my junior year at Abilene Christian, all the Bible majors had to take a battery of tests, psychological tests. And it took a few weeks, and you'd get it back, and it had all this information about you. And I remember the day sitting in the living room of my apartment, and me and my friends are going through the evaluations of me, and it says, like in all caps again, in bold, Sean is hypersensitive to criticism. Well, I didn't like that too much. But no one gets out, no one gets away without their share of criticism. I mean, do you know someone, is there someone in your life who everything they say is just dripping with criticism? Like maybe you know someone who is just passive aggressive, or someone who can see the cloud in every silver lining. There are people in your life who just have a reflex for criticism. There are folks that you know who think being judgmental is some sort of spiritual gift. And one of the things that all of us, that you and I will have to deal with through life is how are we going to deal? How are you going to deal with yourself? How are you going to deal with others when you feel judged and criticized and attacked? And there's this crazy little story toward the end of the book of Acts And it's one of those stories that didn't get talked about a whole lot because it seems like it's not really a story in and of itself. It seems like something's going on and you're just reading this part to get to the real story. It's kind of like the previews before the movie. But in that story, in this little snippet of a story, it has so much to teach us about how to deal with criticism and judgment when we face it. And so in Acts 28, we find Luke writing, and this is what he says. And I just want you to know, several years ago, I was part of a Bible translation project called The Voice Bible. There's one copy here in Abilene at Books of a Million. And so everything is told in screenplay form. So if it seems a little different from your Bible, that's the reason why. So Luke says, Luke and Paul, quickly learned that we were on the island of Malta. The Maltese people found us and were extraordinarily kind to us. They kindled a bonfire and welcomed us around it, which we greatly appreciated because it was raining and cold. So here's Paul, along with some others, and he's a prisoner and finds himself shipwrecked on the island of Malta. There was a storm at sea, and their boat hits a reef, and they end up shipwrecked on this island that runs aground. So they find themselves on this island, and the Maltese people come to help them, which is odd because they had Phoenician roots, and the Maltese people were known for not being that kind to people. That's the reason that Luke bothers to mention it in the first place, that they were kind and they usually weren't. And now the Maltese see that Paul is a prisoner. And as you're reading through this story, if you forget the fact that Paul's a prisoner, the rest of the story won't make sense to you. So you have to remember, Paul's a prisoner, and it's cold and wet, so the Maltese decide to build a bonfire, and then this happens. Paul was gathering firewood and helping build a fire. A viper had been hiding in some of the wood, and as it tried to escape the heat, it bit Paul on the hand. It sank its fangs in and wouldn't let go. The natives saw it dangling from his hand. Well, this is justice, is what the Maltese figure. The gods, whoever they are, they come along and they see Paul and they see that he's a prisoner, and this is what they say. This man must be a murderer. He escaped the sea, but now justice has caught up with him. So he must be a murderer because what had to have happened is that this storm and this shipwreck was sent to kill Paul, but it didn't work out. And so if all of this is going, then this guy must be really bad. So God, or the gods, sent a snake, and it's a viper. And the Maltese are expecting Paul to die, and to die quickly. And look what Paul does. Paul simply shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no harm. The natives knew what to expect, rapid swelling, followed by death. But when they waited a long time and saw that Paul suffered no ill effects of the bite, they changed their minds and concluded that he was a god. And so this is what happens so often with judgment and criticism. People who don't know you, people who don't love you, get one glimpse into your life, one scene, one picture, this one event, that they read one social media post or meet you at one season in your life and base their entire opinion about you based on that one experience. Or maybe you're a student and all of your effort and all of your achievement gets boiled down to one test. Or maybe you've been looking for a job for a long time. And you know it all comes down to this one interview with this one person and their one impression of you. Our world loves to make snap judgments. And we call it going with our gut, but what it really is just living with a lack of information. So several years ago, Tiger Woods was experiencing a whole lot of public criticism, and he has this conversation with Charles Barkley, the basketball player, and Barkley tells him, he says, I just want to remind you of one thing. All of these people criticizing you, they don't know you, and they don't love you. But it's not just other people, is it? I mean, sometimes we're the ones who are quick to judge. We have this notion that one interaction or one impression, one behavior of someone else's, one vote or one season in someone else's life is all we need to know to form a correct assessment about who they are. And that's precisely why we live in a culture of blame and antagonism. That's why when you look at the world, everything that's wrong with the world is someone else's fault, and if they would all just get it together, things would be better. And that's why some of us look at our family, see our wife, see our husband, see our kids, and if these people would just get it together, then things would be a whole lot better. But here's the problem with snap judgments. They're almost always wrong. When Paul arrives on the island, the Maltese see him, and he's a prisoner. He's been through this storm and this shipwreck, and they immediately assume, oh, he must be a murderer. He's bitten by a viper. He must really be a murderer. But when he doesn't die from the bite, he must be a god. And over the course of your life, there are going to be plenty of people that you meet who think that you are either a murderer or a god. There will be some people who will always think the worst thing possible about you. And there will be other people who think that you can do the impossible. And because you're a loving, caring, spiritual person, you are going to be tempted to over-evaluate their words. When I see this little scene in the life of Paul, I see all of the action happening around Paul, and he does very little. The guards are doing their work, and the Maltese do their work. The only thing that Paul does is pick up a stick to throw into a fire. And when that snake bites him, he literally, and I wish I were stretching to make this connection, he shakes it off. And that's the same thing that Paul does with the Maltese's assumptions that he's a prisoner and their equally invalid assumption that he's a god. And Paul never addresses any of it because he doesn't let their opinion of him form his opinion of him. Listen, what other people think about you is none of your business. And that's not to say that you're perfect, that you're flawless, that we don't all have room to grow, and that we don't struggle and have all our own faults and fallacies. And I'm not saying that there aren't times where someone who does know you and does love you needs to pull you aside and say, I don't know that you are living up to the commitments that you've made. And that's one of the wonderful things about criticism. Because criticism does allow you to do two things. First, it allows us to learn from our critics. And at the same time, that once we've had enough of it in life, we just learn to care less about the opinions of others. So several years ago, my friend Matt called me up, and he was receiving a lot of criticism. And he said this thing I thought was really kind. He said, Sean, you get a lot of criticism. He said, what do you do about it? I said, well, there are two things, and I'm not saying these are the right things to do. These are just the Sean things to do. This is just how I do it. And I said, the first thing is that when I'm criticized, I think about it because sometimes they're right. that I know that I'm not a God. Like there's just no way that I can be right about everything all the time. That I know that I make mistakes and I don't take everything into account, that I'm not thinking clearly, or that I've become overly emotional about something. So sometimes they're right. And I said, other times I hear criticism and I just don't care. Several years ago, I became friends with one of my favorite authors, Brian McLaren. And at the time, it was right after Brian had been named by Time magazine as one of the 25 most influential evangelicals in America, but he was also receiving a whole lot of criticism. And so we were having a conversation at dinner one night, and he shared with me a prayer by a Serbian bishop. And the prayer is a prayer regarding critics and enemies. And since that time, I've always kept it close to me. And the prayer says this: "Bless my enemies, O Lord. Even I bless them and do not curse them. Enemies have driven me into your embrace more than friends have. Friends have bound me to earth. Enemies have loosed me from earth and have demolished all of my aspirations in the world. Enemies have made me a stranger in worldly realms and an extraneous inhabitant of the world. Just as a hunted animal finds safer shelter than an unhunted animal, I, persecuted by enemies, have found the safest sanctuary, have ensconced myself beneath your tabernacle where neither friend nor enemy can slay my soul. Bless my enemies, O Lord, even I bless them and do not curse them. They, rather than I, have confessed my sins before the world. They have punished me when I have hesitated to punish myself. They have tormented me whenever I have tried to flee torments. They have scolded me whenever I have flattered myself. They have spat upon me whenever I have filled myself with arrogance. Bless my enemies, O Lord, even I bless them and do not curse them. Whenever I have made myself wise, they have mocked me. Whenever I have made myself mighty, they have called me foolish as though I were a fly. Whenever I have wanted to lead people, they have shoved me in the background. Whenever I have rushed to enrich myself, they have prevented me with an iron hand. Whenever I thought I would sleep peacefully, they have awakened me from my sleep. Whenever I have enemies have stretched out my hand to the hem of your garment. Bless my enemies, O Lord, even I bless them and do not curse them. Bless them and multiply them and make them even more bitterly against me, so that my fleeing will have no return, so that all my hope in men may be scattered like cobwebs, so that absolute serenity may begin to reign in my soul, so that my heart may become the great in heaven, so that I'm freed from self-deception in the dreadful web of anyone only when he fails, but and who is in the world, friends or enemies, curses enemies, but a son blesses them, for he understands. For a son knows that his enemy, for he freely and at no or complain or even doing. Entity bestowed upon us by you. And we ask for all these things in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Been set free. Sing Christ is enough. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for Jesus, no turning back, no turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus, no turning back, no turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me, no turning back, no turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me, no turning back, no turning back. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you, God. Everything I need is enough. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need, I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. 'Cause I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. 'Cause I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. There's no turning back, no turning back. No turning back, no turning back. Have a seat.
We pray for these are the prayers of the people today. God, we give you thanks for the way you show your great love for us. Father, today, as many of us have offered these prayers to you, Father, we lift up concerns for reconciliation in families and in marriages. We lift up prayers that fears and anger could be removed. Father, here's in the heart of one of us today. It reads, God, will you help us make hard decisions? Can you tell me and others what we can do at church? Will you be with people who are sick, sad, or lonely? Help us to know what trails to go on. So, Father, walk with us this week. Guide our hearts as we learn to love more and more like you each day. In the name of Christ, we pray.
Hey, we want you to know that we're so thankful that you came and spent your morning with us. Thank you for being here. If you're a guest and you have questions about Highland, or you'd like to figure out a way that you could get plugged in and involved, as you exit this room, to your right is the Welcome Center, and they have lots of information and ways to get you plugged in. So church, let's all stand. And as we leave today, may the peace of Christ guard your hearts so that you know that you are lavished and loved as his son and daughter. And may we